the world over, like our Celt Fiona. This story is set in Africa. It's the story of a man named Wali Dad, the Content Beggar. Now, he lived in a humble hut next to a trade route, and although he appeared to have nothing at all, he always said, "Oh no, I have just the right amount. Anything more would upset the balance." He had one friend, a merchant. Let's call him George. George. Now, George was that rarest of men, an honest merchant. And whenever Wali Dad needed anything, he would cut some grass as fodder for the animals, for traders who came by, and they'd give him a few gold coins. He'd put them in a basket. And then he'd give the coins to George, and he would go and acquire whatever he needed. And Wali Dad always said, "Don't forget to take a little off the top for yourself, George, for your trouble." And so Wali Dad and George were very good friends indeed. One day, Wali Dad reached into his basket for gold coins, and he couldn't get his hand in because it was so full. "Oh, George, this is terrible," said Wali Dad. "I can't have all of this money. Oh, then I'll have possessions and it'll upset the balance." "I know. You take the gold coins into town and buy a gold bracelet and give it to the most beautiful and virtuous woman you know. Can you do that?" And George thought for a while and said, "Yes, I know a woman who is beautiful and virtuous. She is the Dumna's daughter who lives in the east." The Dumna was the priestly, wealthy class at that time. "She is a beautiful and virtuous woman." "Perfect," said Wali Dad. "Please give her the gold bracelet with my compliments. And don't forget to take a little off the top for yourself, for your trouble." And so, off George went. And when he got to the Dumna's daughter, she admired the beautiful gold bracelet. "But who is this Wali Dad? I've never heard of him. I don't want to be beholden to someone I don't even know. I know. Take these beautiful cloths that my father has brought me and give them to Wali Dad with my thanks." And so off George went back to his friend. "George, what am I going to do with all of these cloths?" said Wali Dad. "This is terrible, worse than before." "I know. Can you think of an honest and virtuous man that we could give those cloths to?" George thought for a moment. "You know, there is a young man who's a leader in the village just over the border to the west. I believe that he is an honest and virtuous man, and he's quite wealthy besides." "Perfect," said Wali Dad. "Take the cloth to the leader in the west. And don't forget to take a little off the top for yourself and for your trouble." And off George went. Well, when he got to the young man in the west, he was most impressed with the beautiful and expensive cloth, but he said, "But who is this Wali Dad? He must be very wealthy and generous. I know what I can do. I will send a herd of goats back to him with my thanks, and that way I will not be beholden to a stranger." And so off George went back to his friend. "Goats? What am I going to do with a herd of goats?" said Wali Dad. "Oh, keep a few for yourself, George, and take them immediately to the Dumna's daughter in the east." Off George went. "Oh, and don't forget to take a few for yourself for your trouble." Well, when the young woman saw the goats, she said, "Oh, he must be a very wealthy and generous man. Oh, but I cannot be beholden to someone I don't know. What can I give him that's more valuable than this? My father has brought back some Arabian horses. You take 3 of these horses and give them to Wali Dad with my thanks." Off George went. "George, horses?" said Wali Dad. "I can't believe it. Please take one for yourself, for your trouble, and go immediately to the leader in the West." Off George went. Well, when the young man saw the horses, he was most taken aback. But this Wali Dad must be the richest and most powerful man in all the region, and I've never heard of him. Oh, what am I going to do so I won't be beholden to a stranger? I know. There's nothing for it but to give him an entire herd of cattle and my grandmother's gold jewelry. Back George went. Wali Dad said, "George, I cannot have cattle and jewelry. Talk about upsetting the balance. Please, maybe this will be the end of it if you take it to the Jumna's daughter in the east." And off George went. Oh, but don't forget to take a few for yourself for your trouble. Well, when the Jumna's daughter saw cattle and antique gold jewelry, she sighed. "Oh, I see. He wants to marry me. Well, he's clearly very well off and kind and generous. I will gather my bridal party together and go and meet my bridegroom." Well, George hurried back to his friend as fast as he could go. And he said, "Wali Dad, we're in trouble. The Jumna's daughter thinks that you have proposed to her. This is breach of promise. Oh no, what are we going to do when she sees my hat? She'll never want to marry an old man like me. Think. And then he came up with a clever idea. "George, you go and get that leader from the West and bring him here to the hut as fast as you can. I'll try to stall the Jumna's daughter." Off George went. But the young man had already started back to see who this amazingly rich and powerful Wali Dad was. And so the leader from the village in the west and the Jumna's daughter from the east arrived at Wali Dad's hut at the same moment. And Wali Dad stood up and said, "I have had a vision in a dream that the Jumna's daughter from the east must marry the village leader from the west. And that is why I have done all of these things, to bring you together." Well, the Jumna's daughter from the east looked at the young man from the west, and he looked at her, and they fell in love at first sight. And so they were married. And they tried to give Wali Dad a wedding present for his trouble, but he wouldn't hear of it and gave it right to George. And so the leader and his bride lived happily ever after in the West, and George the merchant lived happily ever after, heavily paid for his trouble. And even Wali Dad lived happily ever after, although he took great care never to amass so much money ever again.